Alright, so this is going to be the bonus video for modeling the teddy bear, which is going to be part of the toy box assignment. Okay, so I'm in 3ds Max and I'm going to bring in the image of the teddy bear and set it up on a plane as reference. Okay, so I'm going to jump to perspective. I'm going to hit F on the keyboard to go to the front view. And I'm in the create panel, I'm going to create a plane. So I'll just draw this out in the front view. And for length and width, I'm going to make sure it's 2 by 2 feet. So I'm measuring with feet and inches. For the segments, it just has to be 1 and 1. And I'm going to make sure this is centered. So I'm going to right click on select and move and just center X, Y, and Z for now. And I'm also going to rename this. So I'm going to call it bear REF for reference. Okay, so I need to bring in the texture that I'm going to use, or the image I'm going to use. So I'm going to hit M to open up the material editor. So I already have stuff in here. I'm going to reset my material editor slots. So I'm going to go up to utilities and reset material editor slots. Okay, so I'm going to start over from the beginning. I'll start with a new standard material and I'll call this one bear ref as well. And under diffuse, I'm going to click on the empty map button, and once the material map browser window opens, I'm going to double click bitmap and I'm going to search for the image which I already saved, and I just Google searched for a teddy bear image. So I've saved this in my project folder. And I'm going to use this one here with the bow tie. Okay, so before I apply this to the plane, I'm going to make sure in the material I'm turning on show shaded material in viewport, otherwise it won't show up at first. So if this is on and I drag this to the plane, you'll see the image on the plane in the viewport. Okay, so if I click here, go to parent, brings me back up to the main part of the standard material. And you can now see the map is loaded in here under diffuse. There's an M telling me that there's a map. Okay, so I'll close this and I'll start lining things up first of all. So in the viewport, I'm just going to zoom in a bit and I'm going to move this up on the y-axis so it looks like the teddy bear is sitting on the ground. So we're going to model the teddy bear as if it's sitting. And I'm going to make sure that the center of the grid lines up with the center of his nose. Okay, so the image isn't perfectly straight, so I'm going to have to guess a little bit, but this is just for reference, so it's close enough. And then I'm going to hit P to go back out to perspective, and I'm going to move this back in the y-axis a couple of grid spaces. Okay, so something like this will be fine. So I'm only moving this back in the Y. And then I want to freeze this, but right now if I right click and choose freeze selection, it's going to disappear. So it shows it in gray. So if I right click and go to object properties first, I'm going to turn off show frozen in gray. I'm going to click OK and then I'm going to freeze this. So right click, freeze selection. Okay, so now I can't accidentally shift this around. And I'm going to start the model with a box. Okay, so from the create panel, I'm just creating a box in the view. I'm going to turn on edged faces and shaded mode up here. So I'm not using realistic, it's going to be shaded and edged faces as I'm modeling. And for the box, I'm just going to guess and say about 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot. I can scale this down after. And under segments, we're going to spherify the box, so I want 4, 4, and 4 segments. Okay, so once you add those segments, you can right click on select and move, and I'm going to reset X, Y, and Z to 0 so it's centered. And up here in the modify panel, under modifier list, we're going to add spherify. So we're going to spherify the box. and then it's going to force that box into a sphere that's completely made up of quads. Okay, so now we can right click and convert this to editable poly, and I'm going to change the color. So I'm just going to create a material here. Okay, so the color doesn't matter right now, but I'll just quickly change this to a color that matches closer to the teddy bear. So if you have an image back here in Max, you can click on the sample screen color button or the eyedropper tool, and you can actually pick a color off the image. Okay, so I'll just use this, and I'll drag this onto the box, which I'm now going to name teddy bear. Okay, so technically this is the teddy bear's head. We're going to model this in different pieces. Since we're not animating it, we're just going to group it together for a render. So it's going to be teddy bear underscore head. And one trick, so we've changed the material color. So we're now using a material, but the object still has a purple color here. So if I click off of this, you'll notice that the edges have that color. So if I wanted these edges to show up a different color, like I usually change this to black, I'm going to click on the purple swatch here, change it to black, and then when the object's deselected, the edges just show up black. Okay, so the next step is to go back to the front view. Okay, so again, I've made sure this is centered. I'll double check by right clicking on select and move, so X, Y, and Z are centered. And I want to line this up close to the drawing so I can kind of start tracing out the main features. I want to block in the eyes. I'm going to extrude ears. I'm going to extrude the mouth area. So I'm going to hit Alt X. With this model selected, it's going to make it see-through. And then I'll move this up close to the center of the face. And I'll zoom in a bit. Okay, so I want to try to work with the edge loops that I have right now on this model, just by shifting things around. So there's two ways you could go about grabbing your edge loops. You can select an edge and you can hit loop. Now I have the whole edge loop selected, so the edge loop wraps around the whole model. So whenever I say edge loop, I'm talking about the entire loop that wraps around the model. Okay, so if I grab this one, I could move it up and down. So I'm going to start reshaping things. You could also grab this edge loop. Since we're in the front view, I could just use vertices or turn on vertex. And if I click and drag across, so I'm window selecting, if I click and drag across these vertices, I could just grab everything along that edge loop as well. Okay, so either way is fine. I tend to select things as groups of vertices so that I can scale them. And I'll show you what I mean about that in a minute. So I'm going to grab this edge loop as vertices, and I'm going to just shift this down under the eyes. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is I'm preparing an area that I'm going to use to create eye sockets. So technically we could just make spheres and stick them in here, but I want to show you how to create an eye socket that's round. Okay, so I'm going to drag this down here, so I'm looking underneath the eyes here. So I could also grab all these vertices that make up the top of the head now, and I could kind of shift them down, just make it match the drawing, or sorry, the image in the background. If you right click on select and scale, and I'm using uniform scale, the top one. If you right click on this with all these verts selected, you can hold your mouse button down on the arrows and you can just kind of rescale this group and make sure that it kind of matches the image in behind. Okay, so I want his head to be pretty round. So even this section in here that I moved down, so I'm going to click and drag around that edge loop again. If I right click on scale, it just scales it in the X, Y, and Z axis at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to grab all the verts on the bottom as well, and I could move these and shift them around a bit. You could also scale them in if you want to flatten this area out a bit. but we'll just keep it fairly round for now. If I want to scale the entire object, I could grab it as an element, and then I could use the offset screen to scale the whole thing down as well. Okay, so I'm just lining this up, shifting things around, and I'm going to start moving these edge loops underneath the eye. Okay, so I'm going to take this section, drop it down a bit. So this bottom edge loop is going to be the bottom of the eye, and I'm going to select a ring of edges. So a ring, instead of hitting loop, I'm going to grab an edge and hit ring. It's going to select a ring of edges around the model. Okay, you could also just click and drag across to quickly select a ring of edges. And I'm going to use connect. I'm going to pull this window over so we have two windows now. And under edit geometry, you're going to see connect. So actually not edit geometry, edit edges. Okay, so right now I'm looking here and I see my edit edges is missing, and it's been placed at the bottom here. So normally I want to have soft selection, edit geometry, and edit edges all within the top of this modify panel. So if this happens, you can click and drag to reposition these. So I'm going to put edit edges on top of edit geometry. Okay, so now I've got edit edges up here, and I'm going to hit connect. I'll use connect settings the first time, and I'm going to make sure it's just one segment, and the slide and pinch are set to 0 so it's perfectly centered. Okay, so I'm going to click OK, and you can flatten this out by scaling it. So this whole edge loop should still be selected, and I'm going to scale it flat in the y-axis. Okay, so I'm using scale, and I'm just holding my left mouse button down on the top handle for the y-axis, and I'm dragging the mouse down. Okay, so when I let go, it's finished. You could scale this back out to keep the edges round. Just right click on the scale tool and use offset screen. That way it pushes it in the X and the Y and the Z as well. Okay, so I'm going to take this edge loop and I'm going to move this down so that it goes through the center of the eye. Okay, so from here I'm going to create one more edge loop by selecting this ring of edges above here and hitting connect again. And I'm going to take this edge loop and I'm going to scale it flat. And I'm going to move this one down as well so that it's just above the eye. So it's about the same space above the eye as this edge loop is spaced out below the eye. And I'm going to scale this to make sure it stays round. So I'm going to right click on select and scale and just push the offset screen out a bit. Okay, so with organic models like this teddy bear, I want to make sure my edges and all the curves are nice and smooth around the model. Okay, so I could also take both of these edge loops as vertices and I could scale them out together as well. Okay, so I'm trying to keep this nice and round in here. Okay, so from here I'll probably grab all these edges here and I'll connect one more edge loop. So this is a vertical edge loop, and I'm going to click OK. And I'm just going to take this whole thing and make sure that this area in here is spaced out equally. Okay, so I'll leave this probably right in the center. And what I'm looking at now though is these 4 polygons. Okay, so I've switched to polygon and I'm selecting the 4 polygons around the eye where I want to create the eye socket. Okay, so the reason I want 4 polygons is because I want to inset these and then I'm going to scale the corner vertices in to create a round shape. Okay, so I'll explain this again in a minute. So I'm selecting these 4 polygons And under Edit Geometry, sorry, I'm looking for Edit Polygons again. So again, this one's been shifted down here somewhere. Right here. So I want to make sure I drag this over here on top of Edit Geometry. Okay, so for Edit Polygons, I'm using Inset, and I'll use Inset Settings so that I can use the value here to control the amount. So I'll reset it to 0, and then I'll start pushing this in. Okay, so I'm just pushing this in a bit, something like this, so it just covers the eye. I'm going to click OK, and I want to go around and straighten these edges out. So I'm going to hold Control, and the first thing I'll do is take this side here, and I'll move it over. And I want to try to keep this area square. Okay, because we're going to try to force this square area into a round hole that we're going to use for the eye socket. Okay, so if I start dragging these edges in, you can also flatten these. So I'm going to hold Control. I'm going to select each side. There's 2 edges to each side. And I'm going to use the scale tool just to scale these together. Okay, so I'm dragging this along the x-axis until it's flat. Do the same thing on this side. Do the same thing in the middle. I want this cross section in the middle to be straight. And then same thing from the top down to the bottom. So now I'm scaling in the y-axis. Same thing in the middle. And same thing at the bottom. Okay, so now I could grab those polygons again and just scale them in the x-axis and try to make this a nice square area. Okay, so what happens now is we can grab the 4 corner vertices. Okay, so just the vertices at the corners here, and then we can scale them between y and x along this band, and it forces this into a kind of rounder shape. Okay, so now this is what I'm going to use to create the eye socket. And I'm going to hit P to jump out to perspective, hit Alt X to take this out of see-through mode, and then you'll see if you look here, we've been doing all this in the front view, so it's all twisted in perspective. So before I do anything else, I'm going to take this, I'm going to use the scale or the rotate tool and try to rotate this out so that it conforms to the round shape of the face. Okay, so I'm just, right now I'm holding Alt and the middle mouse button to rotate around the selection. Okay, so I've got Alt and I'm pressing the middle mouse button down to rotate. Okay, so I've rotated this in the screen. I'm going to hit F to go back to the front view, and you'll see how this has shifted this off. So I'll hold Control and select these 2 edges in the middle, and I want to move these over, but I want to make sure it constrains to this shape. So if you want to move edges or vertices without distorting this, so if I move this in perspective, you'll see it's pulling it away from the model. Okay, so I just want to slide these over and have them stick to the edges that they're attached to. So if you go over to Edit Geometry, you'll see at the top of Edit Geometry there's constraints, which are set to none right now. If I turn on Edge Constraints, when I try to move these 2 selected edges, they constrain to the edges that they're attached to. So I can keep these centered. This also works with vertices, so if I select a vertex here and I move it along the edge, it sticks to the edge. Okay, so you have to remember if you're using this to turn it off again. So I only keep this on when I want to constrain things to the edges, and then I'll turn it off again right away, so I'll put it back to none. Okay, so I'm going to grab this whole shape and just kind of scale it in. Try to make sure this is nice and round. Okay, so if I'm scaling it in the view, I have to rotate it a bit as well to try to keep it straight. Okay, so now that I've repositioned this, I'm going to go back to the front view and hit Alt X and make sure it still lines up with the eye, which it does. And then back in perspective, so I'm hitting P, going back to perspective. I'm going to take this and I'm going to do a small inset. So I'm using inset settings, just insetting this a bit, just to create a nice edge loop on the inside. So this would be considered the eyelid. And then I'm going to extrude this back. So I'm going to use extrude settings. I'll reset the height to 0 and I'll pull this down into the negative. And I'm going to click OK. Okay, so ultimately we're going to use either turbo smooth or open subdivision to subdivide the model to make it look nice and smooth. So right now we're blocking in a base mesh, and on top of editable poly I'm going to add open subdivision. Okay, so open subdivision is going to subdivide the model, so it takes each quad and subdivides it into 4 new sections, and we're going to use 2 iterations, so it's going to subdivide everything twice. So if I turn off isoline display, you'll see how many edges and how many quads we actually have in here each time we subdivide. Okay, so you can leave isoline display on. It's just going to show the edges of the low poly model wrapped around the subdivided model. So if I click on editable poly, you can select the eye in here, and you can hit grow if you want to grow this out and select the whole section if you need to reshape it. If I turn on show end result, it's going to show everything in the stack above the current level I'm on. So I'm at editable poly. If I turn on show end result, it's going to show open subdivision. But I still have the polygons selected down here, so I could still use scale and I could still adjust this. So you could also switch your scale tool to local, and now you're scaling this in the local direction of the polygons we have selected. Okay, so I'm just toggling show end result on and off to see the subdivided mesh versus the low poly mesh. Okay, so as I'm doing this, I'm looking at these edges up here and these vertices, and I want to try to keep things straight. So I'm going to hold Control, and where this has angled off from repositioning the eye socket, I'm just going to grab the vertices here and here. I'm going to turn on edge constraints again and just slide these over and try to make sure that this whole edge loop is fairly straight through here. Okay, so even in the center at the back, you could kind of straighten this out. And then I'm going to turn constraints back to none. And I'm going to create an eyeball to put in here. Okay, so right now I'm only modeling half. I'm going to use the symmetry modifier this time to flip it over to the other side. But I'll do that after we create the ears and all the symmetrical pieces. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a sphere that I'm going to use for the eyeball. Okay, so I've just created a small sphere, and I'm going to line this up in the front and left view. So I'm looking at it here in the front view. I'll hit L to go to the left view, hit Z to zoom in, and then I'll pull this over on the x-axis. Okay, so it's sitting here. I'll go back to the front view again. I'm going to rotate this around. Normally, if it's an eyeball with a pupil, I'll just rotate the sphere and then color the middle or create a texture map for it. You can right click on select and rotate to make sure it's 90 degrees in the x-axis. And then I'm going to resize this with the radius. So I'm just scaling the radius down. And then you can jump out to perspective view and just try to make sure this fits within the area. So if you see distortion in the mesh like this where it's pinching, once you get the eyeball lined up, you can go back into the mesh for the model. So I'll click on the bear's head again. And you can just go in and kind of pull some of these areas out. So down here, this edge could probably get pulled out a bit. And again, you can switch this to local to pull it in the local direction. And I'm just finessing the mesh at this point, trying to keep everything straight and avoid any pinching. So you can toggle turbo smooth on and off just to see, so you can see I've cleaned up some of the pinching. Could probably pull this section out a bit more up here. And in this case I might need to grab the vertex itself and just pull this out a bit. So if you want to try to make this even more round after you've placed the eye in, you can grab your corner edge inside the eye socket and you can kind of pull this down in the local axis just to help with the roundness, and just try to make this conform to the sphere that we've put in here. Okay, so you can turn on show end result, and as you're pulling this you'll see how it looks when it's subdivided, and that's what really matters. So we want to make sure when it's subdivided it's nice and smooth. Okay, so that's pretty close. Okay, so I could even size this back up a bit to fill the eye socket better. Okay, so I'll rotate this so it's looking out. And we're actually just going to color this with a shiny black material. So if you hit M, open up the material editor, we'll just create a standard material for this. So you're going to make a standard material, we'll call it I, and we'll make the color black or close to black. And then under specular highlights, this is where we're going to crank up the specular level like this. So I'm going up to somewhere around 90. And then you'll see this big highlight up here now on the material, and we can tighten that and make it look more glossy by cranking up the glossiness. So now you get a real glossy highlight on here. Okay, so I'll make this 40. So 90 and 40. And then I'm going to apply this to the sphere, and when we render later, wherever we set up an area or spotlight, wherever that key light hits the eye, there's going to be this glossy highlight. Okay, so I don't have any lights in here right now. If I was to hit render, it's just using default lighting. And when you render with the default lighting, you're going to see some weird pinching in here and weird shading. Once we add lights to this later, a skylight and area light, or whatever's set up in your toy box scene, most of this will go away. But you can also check with your renders. If you see pinching like this, you can go in and fix it on the model. Okay, so I might come back to this later, depending on the lighting. Okay, so for now I'm going to leave it. I'm going to jump back to the front view. I'm going to select the teddy bear head and hit Alt X so it's see-through again. And ultimately we want to mirror this to the other side. And this time I'm not going to cut it in half and then weld it. I'm just going to drop down to editable poly in the stack, and I'm going to go in and find the symmetry modifier. So I can hit S to jump to the S section. I'm I'm going to use Symmetry, and Symmetry by default flips from this side. Okay, so the character's left side. So I'm going to hit flip. I'm mirroring in the x-axis, and then you're going to see the eye show up over here because I'm working on the opposite side. Okay, so Symmetry's in here. I can jump back down to Editable Poly, and now when I turn on Show End Result, it shows Symmetry and Open Subdivision. Okay, so I can turn this off while I'm blocking things in, and then turn it on to see the end result. Okay, so Symmetry is only going to work if everything's perfectly centered and you don't shift any of the vertices down the center seam off to the side. Okay, so everything from here needs to be perfectly centered in the screen. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is block in the ear on the side here. So I'll hit Alt X, and I'm going to have a look and start thinking about which edges and which polygons I want to use to extrude this ear shape. Okay, so off to the side here, I'm just having a look. Actually, before I do anything else, let's save the file. So I'm going to go up to Save As, and I've already got this saved out as Teddy Bear Video 01. I'm going to hit plus and save it again as 02. Okay, so make sure you're saving. Don't forget to save. Save incrementally, so if anything happens, you can go back to the version before. 3ds Max does create auto back files, but it's much better to save incrementally and make sure you have your work backed up. Okay, so the ear, I want to look at whereabouts I'm trying to get the ear from. Okay, so it looks like I want to extrude the ear from somewhere over here. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to perspective and have a look here. Okay, so what I'm seeing is this section here that I could probably use to create the ear. And what I'll do is select these polygons and use inset to just inset this area, something like this. And then I'm going to reshape this using scale. Okay, so I'm going to scale this in because the ear is going to be maybe about this thick. And I just want to make sure that it's not distorting the side too much. So you could turn on Show End Result and have a look. And then I'm going to space these edge loops out a bit better. Okay, so I'm going to eventually extrude the ear from this shape, but first I'm going to start grabbing these edges and straightening things up a bit. So I'll start with the vertex in the middle because it's creating this kind of kink in the edge, which I don't like. So I want to switch my constraints to edge and just kind of shift this down a bit to keep this edge running straight through the ear. Okay, so down here I've got this happening, and what I'll do is just kind of grab these here, and I'm going to switch my coordinate system to view and just shift this up a bit. Okay, so it's bending this edge loop here, which is fine. I might also grab the bottom and pull it out a bit like this. Okay, so I've got my constraints turned on, so this time I'm going to pull this down. The vertices constrained to this edge, but then I'll just keep pulling it back and forth. Just want to make sure I don't distort the side of his head too much. Okay, so I'm pulling it down, and then I'll pull it over, pull it down a bit more. Just try to space this out using my edge constraints. Okay, so I've already started kind of a round shape here just by pulling these things down on an angle. And again, I might take this section here, shift it up a bit. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that this edge loop kind of curls through here with a nice even flow. Okay, so I'll do the same thing here, pull these down a bit maybe. Okay, so just rotating around, I can see where this is kind of denting in already. So I might want to grab these two vertices and turn off the edge constraints and just pull them out away from the model. And I'm just looking at these edges here, trying to make sure everything is straight. 4 or has a nice curve to it. Okay, so that's close enough for now. Just spread this out a bit more at the top here. Okay, again, I'll turn my edge constraints back on. Just try to keep this stuff even and straight through the centers. So I'm just going to grab these ones, turn the edge constraints back to none. And I'm just shifting things around, trying to keep it straight. Okay, so now I'll grab this section and I'm going to use extrude. And if you want, you can jump right to the front view. I'm going to use extrude and reset extrude to 0 and push this out from the ear. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. If I want to try and fill this area in, I could hit grow and I could scale this all out in the local axis, and it's going to push this whole ear out like this. And I want to make sure that the ear curves, so I need to put another edge loop through the center here. So I'm going to select an edge, hit ring, and then I'm going to connect with connect settings, just make sure it's through the center. And you can scale this edge loop locally and it should push this out. Okay, so I'm going to show end result to see what's happening. And then from here you could go around the outside and just grab the vertices along the sides. So if I hit Alt X, I'm clicking and dragging around the vertice here, and I'm going to start shifting things out to try and make the ear nice and round. Okay, so areas like this I might grab a vertice and just try to keep everything straight and lined up. Just kind of pushing and pulling vertices around right now. Okay, so I'm straightening things up in the front view, but I'm not really sure how that's affecting the model in perspective. So I'm going to jump back to perspective and see what's actually happening here. Okay, so you can see I've moved things around and twisted it up. So before I go any further, I want to make sure that I pull some of this back in and keep it straight. Okay, so I'm just going to pull things back towards the center. Try to keep things spaced out evenly. And just keep rotating around as you're doing this. Okay, so the back of the ear might be a little more convex. So I'm going to pull this out a bit. And I'm going to fix this stuff up here. Try to straighten this whole section out. Okay, so I'll grab all three vertices here and shift them back. And I might taper this in a bit as well. Okay, so again, we're using this image as reference. It doesn't have to be 100% matched to the image. So if, you know, the teddy bear's got a big fluffy ear here, so most of these are going to be convex. If you wanted the ear to dent in, be more concave, you could just grab vertices like this and push them in instead, and then you get more of a concave ear shape in there. Okay, so concave means going in, convex means going out, like this. Okay, so again, when you're going around and you're fixing up your model, it's going to be a lot easier to block these shapes in if you keep the geometry low poly at first. So we're just blocking in shapes. We're going to block in shapes, try to clean them up, and then add more geometry afterwards. Okay, so again, you can turn on show end result. I might decide to grab these, pull them out a bit, just try getting them a little closer to create more of a round shape at the end. So it's going to be easier to line this up. If you turn on show end result, you can see what's actually happening with the subdivided model. Okay, so just make this as round as you can get it. Just double check in perspective, just keep rotating around, make sure it's all straight. So down here at the base of the ear, we might want to keep more of a hard edge in here. So we could add another edge loop in here, so I could hit ring, use connect settings, and then I could slide this edge loop towards the base of the ear, something like this. And then if I hit show end result, it keeps a fairly hard edge in there. You could also scale this in. Just have this kind of tuck back in towards the head if you wanted. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that. The other thing you could do, since we're using open subdivision, is you can grab this whole edge loop. So if I hit loop, oops, on this one here, just grab the whole edge loop that makes up the base of the ear, and I'm going to keep this selected. I'm going to look over here under edit edges at edge properties, and you'll see crease. Okay, so if I crease this right now, you're not going to notice anything, but if I turn on show end result, this is going to work along with open subdivision. So if I crease this edge loop, I'll turn that right up, you can see how it kind of creases the edge and creates a more hard line in here. Okay, so if I reset that to 0 and then set it back to 1, you can see what that does for the model. Okay, so creasing edges is handy to use with open subdivision. If you want to make hard lines in here without adding a whole bunch of geometry to the model, you can start thinking about creasing certain edges. Okay, so I could go around and push and pull these vertices around, but I'm going to leave it like this for now. It's starting to look okay. And you can see both sides now have ears because symmetry is turned on. So the next thing I want to do is kind of block in this area for the mouth and extrude this out. Okay, so I'm going to look at this again in the front view. I'm going to hit Alt X. I'm going to turn off show end result, and I'm going to start thinking about how I want to kind of cut these areas in, or how I'm going to extrude this face from the front. Okay, so one thing's for sure, if I try to grab any of this right now, and I'll just jump out to perspective, if I extrude this from here on one side, it's going to create polygons in the middle like this. Okay, so if I was to hit OK and then show end result, this is what's happening with symmetry. It's splitting it through the middle. Okay, so I could go back and weld this together, but what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to hit undo, and at this point I'm going to collapse symmetry down into editable poly. Okay, so this is going to bake the symmetry so far into the model. Okay, so all you have to do for this is go up to symmetry. You can right click and choose collapse to, and it's going to collapse it down to the modifier underneath. Okay, you can click hold yes here in case you want to undo this. So now when I go to editable poly, the symmetry is baked in. Okay, so I could select a whole section on the front of the bear. So I'll probably grab all these polygons here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 2, 12. Then I'm going to select here. And I'll take this and I'll use inset to create kind of the muzzle of his mouth here. Okay, so this is going to be the shape that I'm using to try to extrude this round area here. And I'll go back to the front view. I'm going to hit Alt X, and if you look at the model underneath, I'm going to want to pull some of this down. Okay, so I'm going to grab some of these areas and I'm going to start shifting them down like this. And I'm just going to start kind of tracing the image in behind and try to make this round area for the muzzle. So right now if I click and drag, I'm actually grabbing vertices in behind the model as well. So instead of the vertices this time, I'll just select the edge and I'll start shifting the edges down. Okay, so at this point it might get a little confusing or tricky because you're actually seeing the edge behind the model as well. But I'm just going to carefully try to line this up. Okay, so when I get to this corner, I don't want to just pull this whole thing over. Instead, I'm going to grab the vertice here and pull the vertice over. Okay, so when I get towards the middle, I'll take this center edge and kind of push it up, and then I'll grab these edges here, push them up as well. I'm not going to get it perfect to the drawing, but I can get it, or the image, sorry, but I can get it pretty close. Okay, so again here I'm not going to grab the edge, I'm going to grab these vertices instead and just kind of push them up. I just want to be careful that I don't distort the eye. And then here where I've put the corners in, okay, so I did one side and not the other. So I'll try to fix this one. Ultimately, if I mess up this side, it's okay because I can use symmetry again after. But I'm just going to try and block this round shape in here. Okay, so I've got something like this. You can see where I've missed some on this side. Don't worry about that for now because we're just going to extrude this out and then we'll apply symmetry again after. Before I do, I want to check this corner here because I just want to make sure that this conforms to the round shape at the front here. So I might pull some of this back out. Okay, so even across the front I might shift some of these out, and I'm just looking at the edge, the way this edge is wrapping around the front of the face. I just want to try and make sure I have nice smooth curves as this wraps around the model. Okay, so back to the front view. I'm going to select these polygons, go back to the perspective view. Okay, and even before I extrude this, I could pull this whole section out a little bit, something like this. Okay, so if I was to pull this all the way out, you could probably get away with making the muzzle from this shape here, but I'm going to get some weird things happening at the corner here. So I'm just pulling this out a bit and I'm going to extrude the mouth from here instead. Okay, so if you want, you can go to the left view, hit L, and I'll just extrude this a little bit, and then I'll just pull it out the rest of the way so that I can pull it out and rotate this cluster at the same time. And then if you need to scale this down, you can scale it. You can flatten this out a bit in the left view. And I'm just going to try to line this up with the edges within here. Okay, so again, I'm just blocking this in for now. I'm going to have a look at this. I'm going to rotate around the view. So if I look at it from here, I might want to taper the sides in a bit like this, just using scale. And because I missed some edges on this side over here, I'm going to deselect polygon, and I'm going to add the symmetry modifier again now. And I'm going to flip this to make sure it's copying from this side. And then I can collapse this again. So I'll right click and collapse to. Click hold yes. And you can see how this looks with open subdivision. Okay, so here I could go around and reshape the polygons in this area. So I can grab this and start scaling things around. If you want to have more control over the shape of the top here, this is where you could go ahead and select an edge and hit ring. And I'm going to connect another edge loop through the center of the mouth here. So I'm going to hit connect, click OK. I'll switch my scale transform to view instead of local. And if you turn on show end result, you can start playing around with this as well. So I could scale this out a bit and start getting a different shape in here. Okay, maybe pull this back. So if you have a selection like this with polygons, you can use shrink and grow to grow or shrink the selection. So if I want to shrink this back to the beginning here, then I can turn on show end result and just kind of scale this area in at the front. Okay, so at this point I can just go around and start pulling some edges out in here. And check it with open subdivision turned on. Okay, so as I shift a number of edges like this, I'll hold Alt to deselect the corner ones and just pull this up a bit more to try and keep this whole shape nice and round, curved at the top. Okay, so I'll hit L, go to the left view, and again I'm looking at this edge loop here now, and I might use crease to create kind of the crease around the mouth here, but before I do, I'm going to try and make sure this is nice and smooth the way it wraps around the model. Okay, so at this point, when I'm selecting the vertices, I'm clicking and dragging around the vertex in the left view because I want to make sure I grab it on this side of the face and the other side, the back facing. Okay, so otherwise if I grab this and move it, you'll see I've left the other side behind. So I'm going to click and drag around it like this and start shifting things around. And I'm just looking at these curves. I want the curve to wrap around the model nice. Okay, so even back on the face here, kind of just shift things around and get these nice edge loops wrapping around the mouth. Okay, so even the center edge loop here, I want to fix this up, and I'll get a better result if these curve nice and smooth around the mesh. Okay, so if I'm making any adjustments in the left or front view, I want to always go back to perspective, hit Alt X, and make sure I'm not accidentally distorting things. Okay, so even under here I might grab this and kind of pull it down a bit. Okay, so if I'm going to grab vertices like this, I don't want to keep using symmetry right now if I don't have to. So I'm just going to make sure I grab them evenly on both sides of the model and just kind of shift things around. Hold Alt to deselect the corners and just kind of shrink the selection down. And I'm just shifting each section a little bit at a time. Okay, so if I show Turbo Smooth on here, we're starting to get closer and closer to that round shape I'm looking for. And I might even flatten this out a bit and shrink it down. So I might go back to the left view and pull the front of the face in a bit. Okay, so even on the front, I might take some of these edges or vertices, and you could grab all the verts on the front here, kind of scale them flat, and just make sure they're running smoothly across the surface here. if I rotate my view, I'm looking at these edge loops and how they're wrapping around the model. And again, if they curve around the model, opposed to creating these sharp edges, it's going to look better when you subdivide. Okay, so I'm going to hit L, and I'm just looking at this whole section through the center here. And I think I want to shift this down a bit. And then a section like this here, so I'm going to outline this area here. Okay, so this is supposed to be round on the front, and these edges are coming out here and then they're going straight down and across. So you might want to take an area like this and just kind of scale these verts back to create a more round shape in here. So I might come back and tweak some of this after, but I'm going to create the nose and stick the nose in here. Okay, so for the nose isn't completely round. It kind of has a heart shape to it. So I'm going to just use another spherified box. I'll make a small one down here. Okay, so maybe I'll punch in 0.2 by 0.2 by 0.2. Segments are 4, 4, and 4 again. And I'm just going to spherify this box. And convert it to editable poly. Okay, so on the front view, I'll zoom out a bit. I'll center the box. So I'm going to right click on select and move. X, Y, and Z are going to be 0. And I'll move this up in the front view so it lines up close to where it's supposed to be. And then in the left view, I'll just pull this out to the front. Okay, so I'm going to jump out to perspective. And I'll move this down. So if I have to scale it at this point, I'm going to use the element. I'm going to select the element and just scale this in from the center until I get it lined up. And I'll jump to the front view again. So if I want to create more of a heart shape or kind of that triangle shape, I'm going to select all the verts on the top. I'm going to right click on select and scale and just push these out a bit. And then I'm going to work my way down to the bottom and scale these in. Okay, so just using this spherified box, we're able to quickly create kind of this triangle or heart-shaped nose. And ultimately, you could attach this to the bear's head and then use the subdivision, open subdivision off the bear. And I'll just make sure again in the left view that it lines up. And I'm just sticking this right in here. So you could rotate this and make sure it lines up. You could just kind of follow the edges So I'll have it sticking off the front like this. You could delete the polygons that are hidden underneath, but we'll just leave it. And if I want this to become part of the bear, so first of all I'm going to add this black material that I used for the eye, so this will wind up being shiny. And then I'll click on the bear's head, go down to editable poly, and you can click on attach and just click on the nose and it will become part of the bear's head. Okay, so I've separated these materials, so I'm going to choose the middle option, match material to material ID, and then click OK. Okay, so now this bear head object has two material IDs, one for the bear's material and one for the nose material. Okay, so again, I could go into the bear, and as I was saying before, I could grab this whole loop around the mouth, and if I turn on show end result, I can increase the crease for the mouth here. Okay, so it might be easier if I turn off edged faces to kind of see what's happening. Okay, so this is no crease. This is with the crease set to 1. So it's just adding this crease around the bear's face. Okay, so again, I might come back to that later and play around with some of this, try to clean it up. Looks like I've got a bit of a fold happening in here, so I might pull some of those verts out. Or pull some of these vertices up in here. Maybe you like the fold that's in there and you might want to leave it there, but I'm going to pull this up a bit. Okay, so if you turn on show end result, you can see how pulling this away takes away from the fold. And I could take these vertices here along the front and I could space these out a bit, pull them down. Okay, so if you want to get rid of the fold, just pull these down a bit. Okay, so the only thing left to do with the head right now, I could reshape some things and push vertices around. If you wanted to grab your nose and just reshape the nose, at this point it's attached, so you're going to grab it as an element, and you can scale this element out if you wanted to make the nose wider or if you have to resize it. So for the eye's separate. I'm going to hit F to go to the front view, and I'll just hold shift and copy the eye to the other side. Okay, so you could also use mirror if you rotated this a certain way. So I could click on mirror and I'll make a copy, and then I'll drag this to the other side. If you want to make sure it's perfectly lined up, you could right click on select and move and just copy. So the X is at -2 inches, so I'll just copy out the 2 inches without the negative, and you could paste it in here. So I've already got it lined up. The other thing you could do to make sure it's perfect is if you take your eye, and I'm going to shift this over a bit, you can go up to hierarchy, effect pivot only, and you can right click on select and move and just set the X of the pivot to 0, so it's right in the center of the grid. And then when you turn off effect pivot only, you can go up and use the mirror tool, and it'll just flip it over to the other side from the center. Okay, so once you've done that, you could go back to each eye and just recenter the pivot. So I could go effect pivot only, center to object. So then click on the other eye and center to object again, and then their pivots will be recentered. Okay, so for now, that's enough for the head. We'll go ahead and do the body and the arms and the legs, and I'm going to save this again. So save as, hit the plus sign, and now we've got file number 3. So if you turn off edged faces, you can have a look at this. You can step back for a minute, and if you see anything weird, you can go back and fix it. We can also move on, do the body, arms, and legs, and come back to the head again afterwards. Okay, so the body, the arms, and the legs are going to be pretty simple to do. You can basically do them all from the same object, so I'll start them all as a box again. I'll just try to figure out a scale here for the box. So we'll say I'll just punch in 0.7 by 0.7 by 0.7. Okay, so that should fill out the body pretty close. Right click on select and move. Right click on each spinner, so 0, 0, and 0. And again, just make sure your segments are 4, 4, and 4. You can turn edged faces back on, and we'll spherify the box. Okay, so that gives us a shape to start with. I'll probably scale this out in a minute. I'm going to take this, hold shift, and just drag a copy of it off to the side for now. And I'll just move it over. I'm going to use this for the arm, and I'll copy it again to use for the leg after. Okay, so if I hit F, go to the front view. I'm going to take this, and you can go ahead and center the pivot. So effect pivot only, center to object. I'll convert this to editable poly, and you can hit Alt X, and I'll just start grabbing the groups of vertices again. So I'm going to grab the top half and move this up to the neck area on the bear. I'll grab the bottom half and just scale this out. So I'm going to right click on select and scale and just push this out to fill up the bottom of the bear. And then if you have to move this up or down, you can move it from here. I'm going to grab the center edge loop, so all the vertices across the center edge loop, and try to keep it in the center of the bear's body. And I'll right click on scale and just push this out to create the round midsection of the bear. Okay, so once again, this will have open subdivision on. I'm going to call it bear body. And I'll jump out to perspective, and I'll just reshape this as needed according to perspective view. Okay, so it'll probably help if I add this material as well, so it looks like it matches the bear's body. If you want the bear to be a little more fat in the middle, you can go ahead and grab your center again, so it's still selected from before, and just right click on select and scale and kind of push this out. You can turn on show end result to see the subdivided version. Maybe push the top out a bit. Okay, so at this point I'm just eyeing this up in the view, and I might push this back behind the head a bit, and that's basically the body kind of blocked in here. Okay, so I'm going to close this, and I'll start modeling the arm from here. Okay, so I'm also going to hold shift and drag this over, and this will be the leg. Okay, so I might as well name this now. I'll call it bear leg underscore R for right. It's going to be his right leg, and I'll mirror it over after and rename it left leg. Okay, so this one we could call bear arm R for right. And in the front view, oops, we'll just start blocking in the shape. Okay, so I'll hit M, and I'll just put the material on each of these for now. So I'm going to take this, go to the Modify panel, so it still has Spherify on there. I'll convert this to Editable Poly. I'm going to hit Alt X, and I'm just going to take the top again, kind of pull it out, and right click on Select and Scale, and just scale this down a bit. Okay, so I'm going to grab each section and scale it in, and just try to create the shape for this arm. Okay, so the top part I'm going to use as the shoulder, and the bottom part will be kind of the end or his hand. And I'll just pull this out to the length that I need. So if you want to create the bend in the arm, you could just grab your edge loop in the center and pull it over. And again, I'm going to use Open Subdivision on this, so I'll add the modifier. And you've got the nice curve in there. So if you want this curve to be even smoother, you can grab your edge loop in the center. So I'm going to grab this edge, I'm going to hit loop. Make sure this is lined up exactly where you want it. And then you can use chamfer. So I'm going to go over to Edit Edges and Chamfer Settings. And then you'll see that if you push this out, it just chamfers that edge. So maybe I'll add another one here. Keep one in the middle. And then if you turn on Show End Result, you can see how this affects the smoothness of the arm. Okay, so I'm just going to put the two segments in here and click OK. And then when I originally created this, it was from a box, so the pivot point's now at the bottom. If you want to move the pivot up to the top of the arm so you can rotate it from the top of the arm, you're going to go up to Hierarchy, Effect Pivot Only, and just drag the pivot up and place it at the top where the shoulder would be. Okay, so when I turn this off, now if I rotate the arm, it rotates from that pivot point. So I'll hit undo, and then you can just move this over. So I'm going to line this up so that the pivot point is at the top of the shoulder, and then you can just rotate this out. Okay, so once you've got it lined up here, you can always go back into Editable Poly, and you can grab these groups of vertices. Okay, so at this point, if I hit F3, it puts the whole thing into wireframe mode, so I can make sure I'm grabbing everything. And then I'll right click on Scale and use Offset Screen again to kind of taper the shoulder down a bit. And I'm going to grab the section down here for the hand and pull it out. Maybe scale it down a bit. So also at any point you could grab these edge loops, just hit loop, and you could right click on scale and you could scale the edge loops in. So if I start from the center, then I'm going to work my way out to the ones I chamfered and just try to make sure everything's nice and straight on the curve. Okay, so now that I've rotated this, I'm going to hit F3 just so you can see this. If I decide I want to take the top part of the shoulder and move it over, you're also going to want to make sure you rotate this group of vertices using the rotate tool so that it rotates and lines up with the curve on your model. Okay, so same thing with these edge loops. If I take an edge loop like this and decide to shift it around, you're going to want to make sure you rotate this slightly so that it's even between the curve here. Okay, so same with the bottom one. I might take this and shift it down a bit, and then just rotate it a little bit as well. Okay, so if I shift things around, I'm going to check my pivot point again. I might have to readjust the pivot. So I'll just move it over here a bit more. Okay, so I'm going to hit F3, and I'm going to leave the arm like this for now. Just make sure it's right up against the body. Maybe rotate it out a bit more. Okay, so I'm going to mirror this and move it to the other side. So I'm going to use the mirror tool in the X, and I'll just move this across here. Okay, so this time I'll just copy the X position from here and then paste it onto this one here. Okay, so when you hit enter, it should adjust itself, and now I know these are exactly across from each other. Okay, so the leg, we'll go ahead and do the leg. And at this point, if you're trying to line things up with the drawing and anything's in the way, you can grab your pieces, just right click and hide selection, and we'll just focus on the leg. Okay, so the leg I'm going to do from the left view. So I'm going to take this object from the left view, convert it to editable poly, and I'm going to start pulling the sections out again. So I've got all the verts on this side that I'm going to pull out. This will be the foot area. Okay, so this section I'll pull back, and this will be the base of the leg, and I'll just make sure that this edge loop is in the center of both of those. Okay, so again, I'll take this, right click on scale, just scale this down a bit, and then work my way to the center, scale that down as well. And this is going to taper out to the foot. Okay, so if I'm making this too big now, that's fine, because I'll just scale the whole thing as an element after, and then adjust the pivot point. Okay, so here, if you want to create kind of the foot area, I'm going to place another edge loop in here. So I'm going to hit connect and slide this back to where the foot should be. Okay, so you can take this edge loop and you can scale it to flatten it out, and just shift this over a bit, and then I'm going to add another one right beside it. So I'm going to hit connect, slide another edge loop just behind it like this, click OK, and then you can grab this whole section here and just kind of start pulling this up. Okay, so if you pull this up, you're creating this foot shape at the end, and if I grab any of these vertices, I could start shifting them over and just try to create a round shape as it goes up. So you could hit Alt X to make sure you can see through, and just kind of tweak the shape of the foot here. And again, you're going to use open subdivision on this, so you might as well put it on there and then see how it looks when it subdivides. Okay, so we're going to use 2 iterations on everything, and you can see here I could pull this up even further to create a more extreme shape to the foot at the top. Okay, so something like this. So I'll jump back to perspective, and if you want to taper the top of the foot like this, then you can just grab a section at the top. So if you want, you could grab all these polygons here and you could scale these in. Okay, so I could scale those in. I could hit grow and scale this in a bit more to taper it even more, and hit shrink. Come back up here and scale it in even further, and if you show end result, you can see it's getting pretty close to the shape we want. So I might scale this out a bit here, make the leg thicker. Same thing here, make it thicker and a bit shorter. Okay, so if I right click and unhide all, okay, so I'm going to go unhide all, it brings the body and the arm back. So I'm going to take the leg and I'll just check in the left view. You can see it's way too big, so I'm going to go back down to editable poly, select it as an element and scale it down. So I'm going to right click on select and scale, use offset screen, scales the X, Y, and Z, and just try to eye it up like this. Okay, so once you're happy with the size here, you can turn off element. You'll see the pivot is down here, but we're going to move it to the back. So I'm going to go up to hierarchy, effect pivot only. Okay, so at first you could click center to object. It's just going to center it here. And then I'll use select and move to just kind of move it back to the base where it would pivot from. And I'll turn off effect pivot only. You can hit P to go to perspective. And then we'll just move this over to the bear and try to line it up in here. Okay, so I'm going to pull this out front and I'm going to rotate it, try to match it up to the image a bit. Okay, so if you check in the left view, you can just make sure that this is on the bottom of the grid. Okay, so at any point you could go in and select it as an element again if you want to scale the whole thing up. Okay, so if you select it as an element, now that we've rotated it, if I switch this to local, then I can just, if I want to make this leg wider, I can just scale it between X and Z in the local axis. Okay, so that's about it for the leg. If you want to copy it over, you can just do the same thing. I'll go to the front view. I'm going to use the mirror tool, make a copy. So I'm going to move this over here, select the first leg, right click on select and move, and just copy everything except for the negative value out of the X. And then select the other leg and paste that in there and hit enter. Okay, so now they're evenly spaced apart. I'm going to hit P to go back to perspective. And I might want to scale these arms down a bit as well. Okay, so I'll go in here and scale this one down. Just make them a bit thinner. So I copied this one as a copy. Had I made it an instance, then when I scaled this one down, it would have updated this one at the same time. So it might have benefited me to create an instance rather than a copy. Okay, so in that case, I would have mirrored this as an instance instead of a copy. Okay, so this is just being grouped together for a render. So it's okay to make these an instance. And then I could have just, I wouldn't have to move this over again. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I've named these things properly. I've got bear arm right. I'm going to copy that, paste it onto the other one, and just replace the R with an L. Okay, so I'll do the same thing down here. You can actually just delete the end of this and put an L in there. Okay, so again, the edges on these are all showing up with whatever color was chosen up here. So I could switch them all to black and they'll all have black edges. And if I turn off edged faces, you can see what the bear looks like in smooth shade. Okay, so it's not bad right now. We could go around and fix a few things, like there's a little dent in the face. I could just shift some of this stuff around. Okay, but I'm going to leave it for now. I'm going to hit save again. And we're going to move on to the last part, which is creating the bow tie back here. So this little bow, we're going to create that, and then we'll just add some basic textures to them for now. Okay, so we'll finish this up by creating the bow back here, and this should go pretty quick. So I'm going to select all the pieces of the bear and just right click and hide selection for now. And I'm going to hit F to jump to the front view. And we're going to create this from a box, and we'll create it in 3 separate pieces just to keep it simple. Okay, so I'm going to click on box, and if I click and drag the shape around the bow, when I let go of the mouse and move the mouse forward, it's pushing the height out, but I can't see it. So I'm going to click and jump to perspective and just make sure that the height is pretty thin, so somewhere around 2/4. And then I'll jump back to the front view, and we just need one segment through the center to start this out. Okay, so you can name this bow, hit enter, and I'm going to right click and convert this to editable poly, and then I'm going to hit Alt X to make it see-through, and you can grab the vertices around the center edge loop and just scale them. Just make sure your scale is set to view, and I'm going to scale this down around the knot in the center. Okay, so I'm going to scale this something like this, and then select your edge in the center and hit loop, and then we're going to use chamfer settings. So we'll just chamfer this out a bit just towards the ends of the knot, and click OK. And then you can switch to polygon and just click and drag through the center and hit P to go to perspective and just rotate around here. And if I use extrude settings, I'm going to make sure to change the top from group to local normal, and I'll reset the height to 0, and you just want to push this out a bit like this. Okay, so you're just dragging this out a little bit. You can even just tap the arrows or just push this out a bit and click OK. Okay, so once you've extruded, you could also scale this back a bit if you have to. If I hit Alt X, it looks like this. And we're going to be using Open Subdivision again, so I'm going to add that now. And I'm going to jump back to Editable Poly. And I want to try to keep these edges sharp in here. So I'm going to select an edge here, hold Control, select an edge here, and then just go to the other side and do the same thing. Hold Control, select these edges, and then we're going to hit Loop. So it grabs all the edges around the outside of the knot. And I'm going to turn on Show End Result and just push the creasing up to 1. And that's going to keep a hard edge in here. Okay, so if I go up to Open Subdivision, make sure Iterations is set to 2. Okay, so this is what we have so far. We're just going to shape the rest of the bow on the outside. So I'll go back to Editable Poly, hit F to go to the front view, turn off Show End Result, and we'll just connect another edge loop across both sides here. Okay, so I'm clicking and dragging across all the edges on one side, holding Control, doing the same thing on the other side, and I'm going to hit Connect. If you hit Connect Settings, you can make sure it's centered, and then you can scale these out to create the shape of the bow. Okay, Okay, so if I turn on show end result, you can see how it looks when it's subdivided. If I hit Alt X, I can just grab these corners and kind of pull them up to create the top of the bow, and then grab these corners here just to help shape the bottom of the bow. Okay, so we're getting something like this. Okay, so I'm going to go into perspective here, and I'm going to take these edge loops in the center. I'm going to hit loop, and I'm going to hit Alt X so I can see the geometry. And if you turn on show end result, you can see how that's collapsing down. And if you want, you can chamfer these edges in the center. And if you push and pull these out, you'll see how it changes the shape. So I just might push it something like this, just to create more of a bow shape along the bottom here. If you add another segment, it's going to make it even sharper at the bottom. If I turn off show end result, you can see where these are sitting. Okay, so we'll toggle that on and off and just kind of push these around to get the shape I want. Okay, so I'm going to click OK, turn off edge, and I'm going to leave it like this for that part of the bow. And then I'm going to hit F to go to the front view. And you can create these ribbons underneath as separate objects if you want. So you can just use a plane, and if you click and drag in the front view to create the plane, then you could just convert this to editable poly. And if you hit Alt X, you could kind of start scaling the shape of the plane. So I'm going to scale the verts at the top and maybe push these down closer to the center. And I'm going to add another edge loop through the center. So I'm just grabbing these edges and hitting connect. And then I'll pull the vertices around the sides here. Okay, so I'm going to take the corner ones and just push them up here. Push this one down to the corner. And then you could select an edge at the bottom and hit ring and connect. And then you can just push and pull these vertices around as well. Okay, so you can just push these vertices around to try to create the shape of the bow. And to create the thickness this time, you can add the shell modifier. So if I add the shell modifier on here and go out to perspective, I can make sure that the shell amount is just about as thin as the bow at the top, and then just make sure the whole thing is in behind the bow. Okay, so again, we're going to use open subdivision just to subdivide this. Make sure it's 2 iterations, and then if I go back to the front view, I can drop down to editable poly, but I can turn on show end result and just make sure that everything is up where I need it to be. Okay, so I can pull some of this stuff around here. Okay, so if you want anything to be sharper, you can either use edge creasing, or you can cut in a couple more edge loops. So maybe through the center here, I'm going to hit ring and connect another edge across here. And I'll do the same thing over on this side. So I'll hit ring and connect. Okay, so if you want to flip this to the other side and just kind of reshape the other bow separately, you can hit mirror. So I'm going to mirror this one as a copy, and I'm going to move it over. And if I go to perspective, I want to make sure this one is underneath the other one. So something like this. And then in the front view, you can push and pull the vertices down here at editable poly. So this time I might grab everything over here, show end result, and just kind of push this up around here. Okay, so this one kind of underlaps, but you can make the bow whatever shape you want, really. Okay, so if I go back to perspective, I've got the bow created, and if you want to attach it all together, you can go down to each piece here and just delete open subdivision and then convert it to editable poly. So that'll collapse the shell modifier. I'm going to do the same thing for this side. So I'm going to right click on open subdivision, choose delete, and then right click on this piece and convert it to editable poly. And then you can grab your bow at the top and just drop down to editable poly and choose attach, and you can attach these two pieces here. Okay, so now this is all one piece for the bow. So at this point you can right click and unhide all to unhide the bear, and I'm just going to pull this out front like this and then just kind of rotate it, try to get it to fit on the bear. So I'm going to hit F to go to the front view again and just make sure this is all centered to the bear. Okay, so if you wanted to try and bend this bow so that it fits, you'd have to make sure you had enough edge segments in here. But if I add the bend modifier on top of this, you can try and use the bend modifier to bend this back and forth. You'll have to figure out which direction you want to bend it and then adjust the angle. So if I wanted it to wrap around the bear a bit, I could use the x-axis and push the bend angle. Okay, so you could add a texture map or you could just color this. I'm just going to create a red material for this one. Okay, so I'm going to change the color on one of these default standard materials, and I'll just assign red to this. Okay, so I'm going to double check that everything has 2 iterations of the subdivision on here. Okay, so the bare body. So once you're ready to texture map this, you could go to textures.com and you could sign up to get free textures. And let's see, I'll go in there and show you where I found a texture that I'm going to use for this. So I just go to textures.com, and here you could type in fur and hit enter. Okay, so if you're looking through here, you're going to try to find something that's looks like it's going to tile, and I found this one down here, which I'm using for the bear. And I've already downloaded this, so I'm not going to download it again. If you want to download this from textures.com, just make sure you sign up and you can download it for free. And I'm going to open up the material editor and just go over a few things about texturing this. So I'm going to create a new material and call it bear fur. Okay, so for this first one, I'm just going to add that fur texture as a map. So beside diffuse, I'm going to click on the empty map button and bring this in as a bitmap. Okay, so I've got it saved in my textures folder, and I'm going to bring it in here. Okay, so again, if I apply this to each piece of the bear, okay, so you'll see right now it's all turning gray. So I have to make sure to turn on show shaded material in viewport, and you're going to notice that the nose has changed as well. Okay, so for each piece I'm going to have to add a UVW map modifier. So I'm going to add UVW map modifier, switch this to box, and I'll just punch in a value that seems to stretch around the model properly. So you could go 1, 1, and 1. And I'm going to do that for each object. Okay, so you can see how easy that was for the arms because the other side was an instance. But for the legs, I copied it as a clone, and I'm going to have to do that one separate. Okay, so to fix the bear's nose, you can just go back up to the bear, and if you drop down to editable poly, you can click on the nose and just reassign this texture here, or this material. So I was using the eye material. I'm going to click assign material to selection. Make sure you have it selected as an element, and then it separates the material IDs again. Okay, so if you jump up to UVW map and you notice that it didn't update, it's a glitch with Open Subdivision right now. So if I delete this and I add it back in, you'll see that the materials are separate. So I'll make sure it's set to 2 iterations again. Okay, so if you want the mouth area to be separate as well, you can go down to editable poly. If you go to the left view, you can grab the whole section around the mouth. Okay, so it might be easier if you select one polygon here and hit shift. It grabs a whole loop, and then you can hit grow to grow this out, and then shrink to shrink it back down. Okay, so I'm just going to grab the front, and I'm going to separate this with a different material. Okay, so I'll go back to this original material and just use that. And again, with Open Subdivision, you'll have to delete it and just add it back in there. Okay, so I could change the color on this, or I could add a different texture map in here. If I click on diffuse, I could use the eyedropper tool, maybe pick a lighter shade off of here, click OK. And if I turn off edged faces and go to perspective, this is what the bear is looking like so far. If you want to add a bit of bump to this material, you can just go back into your material editor, click on that material. So right now I'm in the bitmap. If I click go to parent, it brings me back out to standard. And if you scroll down under maps, you can just drag a copy of the texture map we're using under diffuse and drop it into the bump map. Okay, so you'll make a copy, click OK, and if you double click on the material, it's going to enlarge it in the view, and you can see that there's some bump to it now. So if you want to increase this, you could bump it up to 60 instead of 30, and then it'll just bump even more. And then if you give this a render, hit F9, you you should be able to see that bump on the surface of the bear. Okay, so when you add this to the toy box scene and you have the lights, it's going to look even better with the shading. And if you wanted to give this texture kind of a smoky effect, so you'll see the bear back here has kind of dark spots and light spots. You could blend this together with a noise map. So I'm going to open up my material editor and I'm going to create another material down here. And I'll just call this one bear noise. Okay, so I'm going to use the same texture map, except this time in diffuse. When I click on the empty map button, instead of clicking on bitmap, I'm going to put a noise map in here. So I'll double click noise. Okay, so you'll see if I double click this, it just creates a noise around the material where it's blending dark and light values. So in here you could have your texture map, and what I'll do is I'll go up to the bear fur and I'm going to right click and copy the diffuse color map out of here. So I'm going to right click and copy, and I'll go into my noise map, and for color 1 and color 2 I'm going to right click and paste a copy of that into each one. And I'm going to separate these by going into the first one, which is dark, and if you scroll down to the bottom you're going to see output, and if you turn on enable color map you can darken this texture by grabbing the point here in the curve editor and just pull it down. Okay, so it's going to darken this one, and then you'll see the effect in here. So one texture is darker and the other one's lighter, and now it's blending those two together. So if I go back up to the material editor, the parent, I'll just go back into the noise here. I just want to make sure I can see color 1 and color 2, and you can adjust the size here. So if I assign this to the bear parts again, you're going to see if I turn on show shaded material in viewport, it should show up. Okay, so I've got the same issue with the nose where I'm going to have to delete open subdivision, reassign the material for the nose. So if you go down here, you'll see that if you turn on polygon, the mouth is still selected. So while I'm in there, I'm going to assign this material over here again, and I'm going to click on the nose and assign the dark or the black eye material. Okay, so if I go back to the modify list, I can add open subdivision again, make sure it's set to 2, and then jump up to the UVW map level, and you can hit render to see how that noise map looks. Okay, so the darker you make this material that's in color number 1, the more this is going to show up as a dark material up here. If I click go to parent, you can also play around with the size here. So it's set to 25 now. If I set this to 2 and hit enter, you'll notice that it scales the whole thing down differently. And if I hit render again, you'll see a different result in the viewport. So now I've got kind of this blotchy looking texture. Okay, so I'm going to close this, and just before I save this out, I'm going to add a ground plane. So I'm just making a plane underneath the bear, and I'll make a white material to add to that ground. And I'm going to put in 2 standard lights. So I'm going to put in a skylight. And if you're using a skylight and you're rendering with mental ray, I'm going to go up to render setup. If you're using global illumination, this tab here, make sure you switch the skylight mode to skylight illumination from final gather instead of from IBL. We're not using image based lighting, so you're just going to use the top option here. Okay, so along with this, we're using mental ray, so I'm going to create a mental ray area spotlight. Just make sure it's ray trace shadows, and then you can click and drag towards the bear. And then if you rotate your view, you can grab the cone at this side. Just make sure you've only got the cone selected and move this up. Okay, so I'm going to go into the modify panel, and under intensity, turn the multiplier down to 0.6 so it's not too bright. And then you can zoom back into your bear and just have a look at this with lighting. Okay, so with the noise map, I could go in and adjust how dark these are. It's a little bit dark right now, just to show it as an example. And then I would save this out and merge it into the toy box scene. Okay, so I'm going to hit M, make a quick adjustment to the noise map. So I'm going into color 1, which is the dark one. I'm going to scroll down to output, and I'll just boost the output back up a bit so it's not quite as dark. Do one more test render. Okay, so I like how this looks better, so I'm going to save this out. Okay, so I'm going to right click and unfreeze everything. I'm going to select everything except for the bear. So I'm going to select the plane, the image, and the lights, and I'm going to hide them. Okay, so now I'm just going to select the bear on its own. So all the pieces of the bear I'm going to select, and from here, if you want, you can go up to group and group the bear together, and I'm just going to name this group bear and click OK. Okay, so the bear is now a group, so if I move it around, it's all one object grouped together. But at any point, you can click on the bear, go back up to group, and you can either ungroup it or you can open the group. So if you open the group, you'll notice that the bounding box is now pink, and I can select the pieces of the bear. So I could rotate the arm and reposition it so you can pose it different when you bring it into the toy box scene. If I was going to animate this, I could turn on auto key, and if I set keys on any of these pieces, they're going to move on their own. But then I could go up to the group and close the group, and I could animate the whole bear as a group, but those pieces are still animated underneath as well. So I'm just going to select this and delete all the keys. Turn off auto key. And from here you can make sure your bear is centered, so select the bear. You can right click on select and move. Just make sure X and Y are set to 0. Keep it centered in the screen. And then you can select the bear and go up to File. First I'm going to save the scene as. So I'm going to hit Save As and hit plus. And then I'm going to go back up to File, Save As, and this time I'm going to save selected. So I'm just saving the bear. So I'm going to name this as bear grouped, and I'm going to make sure to save this in my project folder. Okay, so this one I'm going to save under digital media. And then to bring this into the toy box, you're going to go up to Open, and you're going to find your toy box scene, can open that up, and you want to merge the bear in from the file we just saved. So I'm going to go up to File, down to Import, and choose Merge. Okay, so you can merge objects in and out of different scenes. So I'm going to find the teddy bear, which is called Bear Group. I'm going to click Open, and when you open this up, it's going to show a list of all the objects in the scene. So I'm going to click on the bear, and it's in brackets showing me it's grouped. I'm going to click OK, and then the bear shows up in the center of the toy box. So if you've built everything to scale so far, your bear should show up right in the middle, and it should be pretty much to scale with your toy box scene. And then you could just move this out front and place it anywhere you want in the toy box scene. If I wanted to make copies of it, I could hold Shift and I could copy it, or you could make instances. And then if I want to pose this bear a bit differently, I could rotate it, open the group, and then rotate the bits and pieces in here. Okay, so once you've set this up and you've got your camera set up, you can render this out and save it, and then you can submit this. And adding the bear will just give you bonus marks for this project, so you'll get a much higher mark if you add the bear in here. And that's pretty much the end of this project.